Chapter 7. Things were really hopping at the Beehive. By 10 o'clock, there was a line of customers stretching halfway around the block. Everyone made a big fuss over the decor, and there was much oohing and awing over the selection of homemade nail polish colors, the 100th bottle of which BB had finished mixing at midnight the night before. Her customers were in good spirits, laughing and chatting with each other as BB flew around the salon, flitting from one hand to hand, soaking, filing, clipping, buffing, and painting fingernails. That morning, she gave manicures to the mayor's wife, the pharmacist's sister, a pair of identical twins, and the church's organist from both the Methodist and the Presbyterian churches. Even the elderly widow of the former owner of the Frosty Boy stopped in to have her nails done. She recognized the glass bowl sitting on the counter right away. "George used to keep his sprinkles in that back in the day," she said wistfully as she plucked a bottle of ruby red polish off the shelf and held it up to the light. "Of course, I remember that too," she added, pointing to the old photograph BB had rescued from the Frosty Boy and hung on the wall behind the shampoo sink. "Once upon a time, that little girl was quite famous, you know." The happy chattering of her clientele reminded BB of the flock of catbirds that used to come to feed in her mulberry tree back in Clover Hitch. She worked steadily, humming softly to herself. By noon, she had managed to give 36 manicures to a total of 35 satisfied customers. The lone discontent had been Teeny Nelson's mother. Miss Nelson had frowned at her fingernails when BB was finished painting them and complained that the color had looked different in the bottle. BB quickly apologized and offered to start fresh with a new color, even though there were other customers waiting. Then she told Teeny to help herself to a piece of candy from the glass bowl on the counter and said if she'd like to go say hello to the dog while her mother got her nails repainted. "Does he bite?" Teeny had asked, digging around in the candy. BB shook her head. "He's a perfect gentleman," she told Teeny, "unless you happen to be a cat. Go right down that hall and through the white door. My guess is you'll find him napping on the couch." By noon, the rush was over. BB scribbled out to lunch and on a piece of paper and taped it to the front door. Then went back to the apartment to make herself a bite to eat. Having finally finished his chores, Nick Wu arrived at the bishop's house just in time for lunch. "I thought you'd never get here," said Melody as she led him inside. Grandpa slapped together a couple of bologna and cheese sandwiches and poured Melody and Nick each a glass of milk. "I've got some errands to do in town this afternoon," Melody, Grandpa said. Then he frowned and snapped his fingers. "Darn, I just remembered. I left the tuna noodle casserole in the trunk of my car. Would you mind bringing it in? The keys are on the hook by the door." "I'll come with you," said Nick. As they walked across the lawn to the driveway where Esmeralda, Grandpa's banged-up old white car, was parked, Melody filled Nick in on what Teeny had told him. "I'm telling you, it's not a coincidence," she insisted as she popped open the trunk. "Teeny Nelson was talking about my dad. He's the Henry who's been bitten by the love bug, and somebody at the Beehive knows about it." Melody lifted the large Tupperware container out of the trunk. Grandpa had made enough tuna noodle casserole to feed an army. They'd be eating leftovers for weeks. "Is it my imagination or is that new?" Nick asked, pointing to a dent in the rear bumper. Grandpa's driving was about as par with his cooking. "He backed into a fire hydrant last week," Melody complained as she slammed the trunk closed. "It came out of nowhere like everything else he's hit." "What does your grandfather have to say about what's going on with your dad?" asked Nick. "He doesn't get it," said Melody. "He thinks the reason my dad's been acting weird is because it's the end of the school year. But I've already started a list of potential honeys. I have to know who she is. Maybe your dad told your grandfather about his new girlfriend, but he swore him to secrecy or something," said Nick. That hadn't occurred to Melody. On their way back inside, she decided it couldn't hurt to ask. "Thanks," Grandpa said when Melody set the heavy container on the counter. "I'll take it from here. But first, I'm going out to the garage." "To look for the hammer?" asked Nick. Grandpa shook his head. "Don't you get started with me, young man," he said, unhooking the oxygen tube and draping it over the back of a chair. "Before you go," said Melody, "can I ask you something?" "Fire away," Grandpa told her. Has Dad mentioned anything to you about having a girlfriend?" Melody studied her grandfather's face carefully as he answered. She had played enough games of gin rummy with him to know that his eyebrows twitched when he was being shifty about something. "If your father has a girlfriend, it's news to me," Grandpa said, his eyebrows unmoving. "What makes you think he might?" "All the signs are there," Nick chimed in. "You said yourself you noticed Dad's socks didn't match," Melody pointed out. Grandpa laughed. "From this person who gave me grief about a non-sequester? Listen, Melly, I'd like your father to find someone special as much as you would, but if he was seeing somebody, he would have told us. Mark my words, the minute he's done with school, he'll straighten up and fly right again." "Like I said," Melody told Nick after her grandfather had left, "he doesn't get it." She got a bottle of chocolate syrup out of the fridge and put a generous squirt in her glass. Then she tilted her head back and squirted a long stream of chocolate directly into her mouth. Jenny would kill me if she saw me do that, said Nick. Jenny was Nick's stepmother. You want some, Melody asked Nick. He nodded and held out his glass. Where's this beehive place anyways, he asked. The name had rung a bell as soon as Teeny had said it. Melody had seen the advertisement for the grand opening on the yellow flyer her father had written his note on the back of. It's where the old Frosty Boy used to be, she told Nick. As soon as we're done eating, I think we should go over there and snoop around a little. Nick hesitated. I've never been to a beauty parlor before, he said. Neither have I, admitted Melody, but all we're going to do is go in. Ask a few questions and get out. What if someone tries to paint my fingernails or something, Nick asked. Don't worry, Melody assured him. I'll protect you. They carried their milk and sandwiches out onto the front porch. You know what I've been thinking about lately, asked Nick, sitting down next to Melody on the top steps. Water towers. What about them? Melody had always been rather fond of the shiny metal mushroom-shaped tower that stood on the edge of town. She especially liked the way it had Welcome to Royal written on across the top in loopy blue script. Every town around here has one. But how do we know for sure there's water inside, asked Nick. Why would anyone bother to build a water tower if they weren't going to put water inside it, asked Melody. Good question, said Nick. Another thing I'd like to know is why they have all those antennas and blinking lights on top. Melody took a bite of her sandwich and licked a drip of mustard off her thumb. Why don't you Google it, she asked. I've Googled it, Binged it, and asked Jeeves. They all say the same thing, but I'm not convinced. What do you mean, asked Melody. What if it's some kind of plot? What if these so-called water towers are actually full of alien creatures with see-through brains and huge boogity eyeballs, sending messages back and forth because they're planning to take over the world? Have you completely lost it, Woo? Melody laughed. You sound certifiable. Go ahead and mock me if you want, Nick told her, but don't blame me when you're lying in your bed some night and a slimy green tentacle dripping with ectoplasmic goo comes slipping through your window and grabs you by the neck. Can we please stop talking about aliens and get back to the subject of my father's new girlfriend, asked Melody. Maybe Honey is an alien, said Nick. Did you ever think of that? Only you would think of that. Besides, I doubt my dad would fall for somebody with boogity eyeballs and a see-through brain. Nick gulped down half of his chocolate milk and wiped his mouth on his sleeve. What did the person look like who said the thing about Henry and the love bug, he asked, peeling the crust off one half of his sandwich and popping it in his mouth. Teeny doesn't remember who said it, but whoever it was knows my dad, Melody said. Nick wasn't so sure. Henry is a pretty common name, he said. How do you know they weren't talking about some other guy? Did you bring your phone, Melody asked. She didn't have a cell phone, and neither did her father. In fact, they didn't even have a home computer. Henry Bishop had strong feelings about screen time. Melody wasn't allowed to watch TV at all on weekdays, and she only got 2 hours of viewing time on the weekends. I'm starving, said Nick through a mouthful of bologna and cheese. Can't it wait until after we finish eating? One look at Melody's face told him the answer. Nick set down his sandwich, reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping in the search engine. When he first got it, he'd spent hours trying out different names for the built-in electronic personal assistant to call him. Finally, he settled on Your Majesty. Nick typed in a few searches and then turned to Melody, satisfied. You'll be happy to know that according to this, there's only one Henry in rural Indiana, he told her, and it's your dad. Now all we have to do is track down the love bug who bit him.